and welcome to today's episode of the Made for More podcast. Today, I am very excited to have the wonderful Alena here with me today. Hello, how are you?
Hey, Ali, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Before we get too far into it, can you share with the listeners a little bit about where you've come from and where you're going?
Yes. Because actually, there's a really neat tie, I suppose, between the two of those things. I suppose where I came from, I was one of those people that fell into finance. Kind of did the commerce degree because it was the done thing, and then fell into Big Four audit, and so kind of did that usual path audit, did the overseas thing, came back, went into corporate, etc. All under that sort of accounting and audit and finance banner. But it was interesting because it was during that time where I really saw and experience the positive impact that leadership had on performance. Particularly in audit, I was in hundreds and hundreds of teams in any given year, right? And so I had teams that were awful, teams that were awesome, and every iteration of that in between. And obviously in that sort of, technical profession, all of the focus is on technical expertise. But it particularly came to a head when I was in the US and I worked for a particular partner in San Francisco who was awesome. Like, he was equally as, if not smarter than so many of the partners I'd worked with, but he was just a good person that led in a really clear manner, but really engaging manner. And I went and I would do anything for him, right? And he really just focused on making the people feel good so they would do the work. And I kind of went, oh, there's something in this. There's something in this positive leadership. And so that sort of stayed with me. Kind of since. I also, whilst I was over there, started delivering and developing training, advising other engagement teams and all the rest of it. So when I came back to Australia, moved into corporate, I started using the language, like I started talking about corporate culture and cultural maturity and leadership and development. So that was when I didn't know it at the time, but I was starting to go, hang on, this could be my thing. I was then sitting in a leadership team at a leadership offsite strategy day, and a facilitator was facilitating the day. And I had that kid moment, like that child moment, where I went, that's what I want to do when I grow up. And sort of the rest is history. I reached out to him, found out that this whole world existed. And so now I spend my time working primarily with CFOs, aspiring CFOs and their leadership teams, helping them amplify the impact of their performance, which is super cool.
Yeah, it does sound super cool. And I've got a similar story and accidentally fell into finance and the rest is history, as they say. But tell me a little bit around, working in audit and especially in banking and finance. You're not the most popular kid on the block when it comes to auditing. So what do you think was, I guess, the key difference with the person that you were working with, the partner in San Fran, that kind of, I guess, bucked that trend on, audit being a bit serious and being a bit more playful at work?
Yeah, well, you know what? He had an unfair advantage over most people. He's Irish, so he's just a good guy. He loves a laugh. He's very self-deprecating, and he loved a beer, right? And so he literally just was a normal human being, and he could have a laugh with clients and his team. And so I think it was that real personable element of himself that there was never any question that he wasn't going to deliver and wasn't as smart as the rest of them. It was just how he sort of packaged it up in that plain English, didn't try to, be too proper. Like if there was a problem, hey, let's just get the right people in the room, let's have a yarn and let's come up with a mutually beneficial solution, which is always possible. But I think there's the perception around sort of the audit being the policeman and there being this adversarial relationship with the organisation they're auditing. And so I think it was my watching that firsthand and going, hey, that relationship doesn't need to be adversarial, and actually you get better outcomes when there is a better relationship between the team, the two teams. And he sort of brought that attitude into the audit room as well, which was just like, hey, you're all people, do what you want, here to help, I'm happy to get in the trenches with you. He was very clever in the way he rewarded us. Like there was one amazing holiday that I wasn't able to take because he asked me to work on the weekends and all the rest of it. But, he then at the end of that said things like, oh, look, I want you to take Cody, my boyfriend, now husband. I want you guys to go out for a nice dinner. Just put it on me. I really appreciate the sacrifices you've both made. So he was just very creative, and I think just being a decent human being brought that into the office.
Yeah. And I think you touched on something around when you're saying, building those relationships, being really vulnerable and authentic in, this is what needs to happen, versus the I guess the idea of suiting up when it comes to corporate and being, very, very straight edge and no room for deviation.
Well, I just remembered, actually, he picked me up to take me to my client. So because I was an expat, I didn't have my own car. And so he would just come and pick me up from my house on the way to the client and drop me off. Like, old school, he's the top of the totem pole. You wouldn't really expect them to do that, or for me to feel comfortable asking him to do that. But it was just, really bucking that trend. It was awesome.
Yeah, I love a rule breaker. So good.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit now, you work with CFOs, you work with aspiring CFOs and their management team.
Yes.
What drove you to start focusing on CFOs?
I could speak their language. Yes. And I think it's more than that. My first role out, or the first consulting work I did when I left corporate was not in finance. And I think what that allowed me to do was it gave me the space to sort of put that piece of my career on pause a little bit. But in doing so, I still was working with very technical left brain people, but it sort of gave me that space from the finance grind that actually what I saw over that 12 months was I became more endeared and back to finance. And I think it was probably a lot of compassion and empathy was building up in my head around, gosh, it is just so hard to be a finance professional these days. It is so hard to be a CFO. And hey, I know that world, I can talk the language, and I've got a really different perspective that if I'm working with really smart people, like the people that are excellent at doing the role of CFO and finance leader and all the rest of it, if I can partner with them and help them do their job better through the stuff that I love, which is the leadership skills and non-technical stuff, then that's going to make their lives easier and hopefully not only help them excel at work even more, but have more fulfilled lives overall. So I suppose that's sort of what made me go back into finance, was to be able to utilize all of that skill and the education that I had learned to date and really sort of channel that energy and expertise in a different way, provide that different perspective, because gone are the days where you can get by with just being a technical expert anymore. You've got to have the non-technical, but it's not what people signed up for, right? And so it's a little bit unfair to think that, suddenly you have to be an expert in, leadership now or executive presence now. So I go, well, you know what? I love that area, so let me help you.
Yeah. I think you've hit the nail on the head. There are so many leaders these days who are technically great, and that's what's got them to where they are, but they're missing that people part. And when we think about, they're now charged with leading the most valuable asset, normally the people part of an organization or a business, and it is a completely different skill set. So just on that topic, have you seen a shift, I guess, in what was traditionally a CFO, so Chief Financial Officer role, versus what we're seeing now?
Yeah, totally. Oh, absolutely. And I think that's where I think it gets really exciting. I sort of talk about a spectrum of from scorekeeper to playmaker.
And so
they're a little bit left of field terms, but I know that that I sort of have to educate people around what they are. But if you think about a scorekeeper, like a scorekeeper sits on a sideline and just takes score. They just record what happens, on a netball court, on a football field, what have you. They're not very influential around the status quo. Playmaker is someone who creates plays. Like, they may not be the captain of the team, but they're the one who, like the quarterback of an NFL team, or I've just finished a blog about Gary Ablett, who plays for the Geelong Cats, right? Just manages to create something out of nothing. So I see that as sort of the real meta shift, but it's sort of, if we start to just use a bit more sort of left brain technical language, the shift is one from, that real controller, command and control type leader, the suited up that we were sort of talking about before, to then a firefighter. So someone that's just putting out fires, like in crisis mode all the time, which I think most CFOs and finance leaders find themselves from time to time. But I think that sort of react and respond was very existed a lot, was quite pervasive back in the day. We've then sort of seen the industry move towards a need for having trusted advisors and business partners. And I think in my personal opinion, it makes the job more interesting because you sort of get your hands and head stuck into what the business does, and how the businesses serve communities and customers. But again, what that does is it just increases the skill set required of a CFO. Which, you know, we've got the same amount of time that we did 30 years ago when we could do command and control and just hit people over the head with sticks. Suddenly that just becomes a bit harder, particularly if that's not the area that they've been trained in.
Yeah, and I think it's rare these days. Well, maybe it's not rare. Correct me if I'm wrong. That people that have come up that regular career trajectory, career path to a CFO aren't necessarily looking to build those skill sets necessarily. It's around building the capability, the technical capability to be able to run finances, build those relationships with the business partners, but not necessarily, I guess, have the leadership thinking or the leadership hat on.
Yeah, I think like our generation, I think we've been caught in the middle. So I think what we saw, we were led by command and control. I'm going to hit you over the head if you do something wrong. And below us, so the younger generation are the ones that are, you know, they're purpose-led. They expect companies to contribute to society, all of that stuff. So I think our generation is stuck in the middle. And so I think what's going on is, and I'll be really blunt, we just need to let that generation die off. That, you know,
metaphorically.
Or self-select, well, maybe not metaphorically, or self-select out of the game. I think what's going on with our generation is that they're asking themselves, they're saying to themselves, I know I want to lead in a certain way, I just don't know how. I just need the skill set and assistance to show me how, because I know at an intellectual level the benefits that it can provide, but just that implementation bit becomes the sticking point.
And lack of role models as well, if they're not demonstrating.
100% lack of role models. And I think, you know, so it's a really exciting time to be a CFO at the moment. I think last year really put CFOs in the spotlight. You know, for the first time, if you were, let's say, a back office CFO, you know, suddenly the spotlight was on, hey, you know, the company needs to survive. Strategies need to shift, you know, who are the head, how many people do we need to let go, stand down, or lay off? And so, and also the cash, you know, running cash flow forecasts all the time and figuring out government incentives and all the rest of it. And so I think if you combine the typical shift, or sorry, the trend of what it means to be a CFO that we've just talked about, that shift from scorekeeper to playmaker, I think you've also got this, you know, as bad as COVID has been and still is, it's given CFOs the platform to shine. And I think how exciting is that? And I was speaking with the CFO in preparation for my book, and the way she described it is she said, I see the CFO as being the arteries of an organisation, because they sort of permeate and touch every part of an organisation like the heart does for a body. And I just thought, God, what a great metaphor to describe the role of a CFO in a finance function in an organisation. One that, you know, a little bit like audits, not typically valued, or met with a smile.
I love that. So CFOs are like the arteries of an organisation because they touch on all different areas. Do you think, even though this has always been the way, and now that it's more highlighted, that CFOs, I guess, are considered with a little bit more importance, or have a closer seat at the table, so to speak?
I think so, and I think that's exactly right. But no, you know, more than ever, I think boards and CEOs want their CFOs to step up. Another term I use, which is, I suppose, the same sense as being the heart, is CFOs are often seen to be the glue. And I think what that demonstrate is not only do they have that great mandate that sits across the business, so fundamentally can form strategic views and connect dots between functions, but, you know, every finance professional is brought up, like you would know, to have a high focus on objectivity and integrity. And so when you think about the corporate politics that exists out there, you want that person that's just going to have cut through and can galvanize people together, not polarize them. And I think, you know, boards and CEOs are looking for the CFO to do that, which I think is just so fascinating, given that stereotypically, CFOs are not seen to be people. Yes, suddenly they are being relied on to bring the people together. And as someone who loves the people aspect of leadership, that excites me to no end. And I think, to be honest, more and more CFOs are coming to me saying, I want people leadership to be part of my brand.
Yes.
And so
yeah.
I think this is the challenge of the broadening remit that we've seen for CFOs over the past, 10, 20, 30 years, is the remit grows, which means suddenly opportunities are greater. But what it means is there's variability of expectation in the industry.
Yeah.
And so while a board and a CEO might want a people-focused CFO, there's probably 5 other CEOs who don't want that.
Yes.
And so it
right.
suddenly creates this confusion or uncertainty around what does it mean to be a CFO? And so I'm quite often saying, look, if you ask me, like, so many of the jobs today, like if you think about chief marketing officers, chief experience officers, chief customers, customer officers, those roles didn't exist last year.
Yeah.
So I sort of say, look, it doesn't matter what your role is, just create the characteristics of the role that you want, create your brand. And as long as you're creating value for the organization, it doesn't really matter what the role is called.
Yeah, totally agree with that. So what types of things, and I think this is a shift for CEOs and boards as well, what kinds of things can the CEOs and boards be doing to support CFOs with this transition? If historically there was a CFO at an organization that worked on that control and command, and now, done a 360 perhaps, or had a bit of feedback and said, hey, you need to focus on the people part of it.
Yeah.
What types of things can the CEOs and boards do to support that new way of leadership?
Look, I think it's fundamentally boards and CEOs want outcomes. And so I think, and, particularly boards of directors, they're being asked to step up and do more and exercise, I suppose, a greater level of due diligence over the roles that the board roles they have. I think it comes down to transparency of vision. I think vision and purpose are probably two of the biggest missing elements when it comes to the performance of CFOs and finance professionals. And I'm not talking about company vision and purpose, because most companies do that these days, but it's about how to be transparent around the big why that sits behind those things. Because as you know, if you think about a corporate hierarchy, messages get filtered,
diluted,
and diluted as they get cascaded down. So I think transparency of that to the CFO, so the CFO can understand the so what, because without that, they simply will not deliver the outcome. And so it's more about understanding the why and being a little bit less focused on the how, because as we know, if someone's delivering results, no one's really going to care about the how. So I think coming back to, what can boards and CEOs do, I think being transparent about the why, and then having the trust and creating the environment for trust with the CFO that they will get it done. And that way it allows the CFO to create their brand, their vision, integrate it and align it with the big corporate vision and just execute it down. Does that make sense?
It does, just like that. Yeah, so good. So you mentioned your book earlier, and I did see a little post on socials about it. So tell me more about your second book baby.
Yes. It's called CFO of the Future. And it's basically a trusted guidebook to help CFOs lead with impact and create value.
Awesome.
I've talked a little bit about the challenges that CFOs have or the challenges and opportunities around expanded remit, change in the environment and landscape, etc. But I think what that does is it ultimately makes it more difficult for CFOs to know what to do. One of the challenges that they often describe that they have is the spinning plates challenge. I feel like I'm spinning a million plates, worried that one is going to drop. What that is it's an inability to prioritize and an inability to not be confident around what to focus on and really invest energy and impact on. And so really what the book is doing, it provides the 12 key skills of the CFO of the future, really, and those key skills are 50% technical, 50% non-technical, which is why it's supposed to be that trusted guide, pocketbook type guide that really helps CFOs know how to dance across all the different types of skills. They don't need to be exceptional at every type of skill, because as we've described, not every CFO wants to be a great people leader, and not every great CFO wants to be a great technical leader. But it's about knowing how to dance across them, knowing how to bring in the people or expertise if you need it, so that they can do the job. But I suppose my bigger purpose is about giving them the skills and the tools to do their job, but also to be able to give them the insight and the tools to live a life of meaning and purpose. Yeah. And so ultimately, when I think about, the concept of a playmaker that I described earlier, I'm thinking about a playmaker as someone who can create plays for themselves inside and outside of work so that they can live a life of significance and meaning. And the reason why that is my focus, and I think this is probably what makes me stand out a little bit in this finance area, is I've found that a lot of being high achievers, high performers, and probably perfectionists, finance professionals and CFOs get to a deadline, get to a milestone, and they go, brilliant, ticked it off.
Yep.
Now what?
Yep.
And there's this kind of lull or sense of meaningless, I suppose, on the other side of that. And what I realized is I saw so much of that. I realized there wasn't any meaning on the other side of the deadline.
Yes.
And I realized that was a lack of purpose. And in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, who's a psychotherapist and concentration camp survivor, he talks about that as he uses the term existential vacuum.
Yeah.
So it literally is sitting in a void with no other meaning or purpose. And so, with his lived experience in the concentration camps, what he saw was that there was a difference. So those who survived the concentration camps weren't the fittest, smartest, or strongest. It was actually those who had a meaning and a purpose to live for versus those that didn't. And so what my work is fundamentally is about is helping CFOs and finance professionals create that meaning for themselves, that life meaning, and integrate work into that so that there's not that compartmentalization, if that's even a word, of work and life, that actually the two can live in synergy, and it just it creates meaning. And I think that's what unleashes discretionary performance at work, in the workplace.
Yeah, I love that. I totally agree. And I'm of the belief as well that we need to, gone are the days where home life was separate to work life. I think if we're not having a good time at home, we're probably having not a great time at
Totally.
work. And if we're not having a good time at work, we're probably not having a good time at home either. And tying in the purpose piece to all of that means that sometimes you can be working on something at work, but it's actually, to fulfill a bigger purpose in your home life.
That's it. Yeah, 100%.
I love it. I can't wait for the book to come out. What do you have a date?
I do. September 8th will be the first time CFOs get it in their hot little hands.
Woohoo!
We're obviously in lockdown here at the moment up in New South Wales. So I don't know what that means, because now we're suddenly dependent on shipping times and things like that.
Yes.
But that's the date that's been driving the deadline.
Oh, amazing.
It's very exciting.
I'll pop all the details in the show notes for today as well.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
What I would love to hear from you now is around your top tips for leaders.
Yes. And I think it's such a great idea to land with this. And I was really conscious of sharing tips that I use.
Yes.
And so it's probably no surprise to think that my first one is know your purpose.
Love it.
As I mentioned, I fell into finance, and I've had a couple of meltdown moments that perhaps can be a topic of another conversation. And what that actually came down to was a crisis of purpose.
Yeah.
And so now I know how purpose not only helps me as an individual, but certainly helps me in my performance at work. But it's just about being able to find that and not think it's some esoteric, intangible, never land that doesn't have any connection to work. So know your purpose is the first one. Create a power base. And what that ultimately is about a support network. Ali, you are in my power base. You're part of my support network. But, particularly, with my clients, with CFOs, helping them create communities is a really big part of what I do. So I've created a number of different CFO communities because I know, just again, coming back to performance and fulfillment, those things can only be amplified when you've got good people around you. Prioritize. It is one of the hardest things to do. We can do everything, just not at the same time, is one of my favorite philosophies of life. Obviously, the difficulty of prioritizing is it means you need to say no. But I think once you've got a clear sense of purpose, it's much easier to say no, because you can always understand the why that sits beside the no. Create a temporal landmark. This is not my concept. This is the concept developed or shared by Daniel Pink, who is he's a best-selling author of Drive, the 2 books Drive and When, The Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing. So a temporal landmark is like an intangible line in the sand where you get to say, tomorrow it will be different. So New Year's Eve is a classic temporal landmark, a birthday, particularly a milestone birthday. Great temporal landmarks. And why they are useful leadership tools, it gives you a reason, it gives you permission to do something different. And so the art of creating a temporal landmark is quite a strategic play, actually. So if you're someone that wants to think more strategically or lead more strategically, creating temporal landmarks is a really good way to do that, because you get to say there's a business imperative or a business problem. I am going to create the reason to solve that, or to take action to solve it, and I'll create a temporal landmark to do that. So I think that's another great one that I live by. It's like, why should I do this? Oh, because today's the first day after I've submitted my book to the publisher, and so now I need to reset myself and create some new habits off the back of it. So that's just a sort of live example that's going on for me at the moment. And then the 5th one is create moments of joy. It's a bit of a subset of, living with purpose, but it's something that, I think is really important, is creating those moments to live for at a really micro level, like almost on a daily, weekly level. I recently found out I was low in dopamine. And so one of the pieces of advice my coach said to me was, you need to create these moments of joy. So you've got something to sort of move you along. If I don't have that natural dopamine inside of me, I need to create it. And I think everyone, particularly if you're in lockdown and have been for a while now, it can be hard to find those moments of joy because you need to create new ones. We can't go out and see our friends anymore. So I think that's something I'm being really intentional about at the moment, is creating new moments of joy and being creative in the process. So those are my 5.
I love that. And I'm a huge fan of being a joy seeker, but I think it's exactly as you say, you need to go looking for it. And then the more you look for joy, the easier it is to find. The reticular activation system kicks in and gives us a little helping hand. But so know your purpose, create a power base, prioritize so you can do everything, but not at the same time. Create a temporal landmark, and create moments of joy. And I think that they are wonderful top 5 tips. Alena, if people want to find you, where do you like to hang out most? LinkedIn, Facebook?
Oh, that's a great question. I love to hang out in person or on Zooms, to be honest, or on the phone. But, the best way to find me is on LinkedIn, or you can contact me through my website, so alenabennett.com.au, or on LinkedIn, Alena Bennett. I'm not, if I'm being really honest, social media is not my favorite. I'm not the most comfortable there. So,
so hook you up for a call, we reckon.
Yeah, I think that's the best way. I love to have a chat.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Congratulations about your book. I can't wait to get a copy once it is in publication.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ali.
All right. Thank you.